Dr. Miller, PhD, doubling up on the credentials because that makes me more smarter. With the Journal Club here, I think we're in the 30-somethings. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, I'm trying to get to 1,000 subs because then I can get monetized, and then I can start making those videos like where I'm at a pool somewhere and a rented Lambo was behind me, and it'd be like talking about how I dominated YouTube and became, and you can do it too, and I can move into that direction too, so I can really spiral up my income. So I'd appreciate it if you'd help me out and get to 1,000 subs. Check out all my videos, lots of videos. Journal Club mentioned for book reviews. I need to do a couple book reviews. I haven't done any for a while. I looked over here because they're on my desk, as well as all kind of rants and other things that I tend to rambles and rants and stuff that I either talk about. Okay, smack the bell too because apparently that's important in YouTube-ness. All right, with that done, let's talk about this study I have. It's a pretty cool study. I'm going to try to do some studies in weight loss and nutrition as well. I've been focused a lot on sets and repetitions and hypertrophy, and I tend to gravitate to these, especially training studies, because they're so hard to do. Sorry for the ruffling, the scruffling here. I have us all turned around. But this was published in 2022 in the journal Strength Conditioning Research. Progressive resistance training volume, effects on muscle thickness, mass, and strength adaptations in resistance-trained individuals by, I'm going to say Aube, hopefully that's right, et al. Quite a few researchers on the study, which is very common when you do a training study because it takes an army to do it. This was an 8-week study. And men aged 18 to 35 years old. Yeah, 18 to 30 years old, excuse me. There was 35 of them. I got 35 stuck in my head. These individuals were 3 years of strength training, at least 1.5 times squat their body mass. So that's good. So it's not just, hey, I lifted for 3 years, and really they don't. They actually squatted. Now the study is lower body centric. So it's an 8-week study looking at 3 different training volumes, 12 sets per week, 18 sets per week, 24 sets per week. So low, moderate, and high. Okay, so 3 groups. These individuals, 35 individuals, were randomized into each group. There's 13 in the 12 set group, 12 in the 18 set, and 10 into 24 set group. They were going to do a week program, lift twice a week. The exercises of interest were the back squat and the leg press. So for like the 12 set group, and there was a high-low day, so day 1, day 2. Okay, the 12 set group. On the strength day 1, that's 6 to 8 reps per set, did 3 sets. Okay, did 3 sets for the back squat. They did 3 sets for the leg press. That is a total of 6 sets. They would come back day 2 and do the same thing with 3 sets of back squat, 3 sets of leg press, but this time 12 to 15 reps. So this spectrum of load, right? This high-low load type of configuration. Everything was 2 to fail. The last set, though, was to failure. Okay, loads were adjusted between sets as needed to make sure they stayed roughly 2 to fail, and then 2 to 3 minute rest periods between each set. All right, so we got an 8-week study, 3 different load volume conditions based on sets, rep ranges from 6 to 8 on one day, and then so that's more of a, you could say more of a strength hypertrophy type of day, and then if you want to do the rep continuum, and then the 12 to 15 rep day, more of an endurance looking hypertrophy day. On the second day. All right, so I mean, you're that 24 set group is doing six sets of back squat and 6 sets of leg press each training day. That's quite a bit, especially the high volume group. I mean, or high volume day. I mean, you're doing 6 by 12 by 15. 6 sets of 12 to 15 repetitions. That's quite a bit. They both did the glute ham with the same volume, and then the first 4 weeks they only did 2 by 4, and then the last 4 weeks they did 2 by 6. But that was uniform across all groups. So this was about lower body only. Just wanted to see with effective volume. Now, what the outcome measurements were 1RM strength. By the way, they did a touch the kind of a touch and go, almost like a box squat, not total box squat technique. 100 degrees, so not 90 degrees. Just something to note. I don't think that sinks the study or anything like that. Have you ever done any research or coached anybody? Everybody thinks they can squat to 90. They can't. So anyway, so 100 degrees. 1RM test for the back squat. Reps to failure at 70% of 1RM. Okay, pre and post testing. And then did a couple other things. Looked at what they called a region of interest, basically the thigh, the anterior side of the thigh. Mark this region for each individual so they come back to it each time. Look at distal and proximal portions and then look at the total thickness. So that's how they measure hypertrophy. So you have strength, hypertrophy, and then also looked at reps to failure was the muscle endurance portion, 70% of 1RM, as many squat reps as possible. Then looked at some perceptual things, RPE, session RPE, and then what they call a feeling score, how the individuals feel about all the reps they did. The final thing they did is they took the results, hypertrophy results, and broke them down into low, moderate, and high responders based on statistical modeling. Okay, and wanted to see then if is the high responder group all the 24 set people, right? Or is there a combination therein? Okay, if you don't know, 22-ish sets. It seems to be 22 to 27. I think Schoenfeld's 27 sets seems to be like a sweet spot for skeletal muscle hypertrophy in general. Depends on the actual body region we're talking about, but you would think the 24 set group would be awesome. This study did point out, rightly so, is that what was the preset training. They actually asked what the preset training was for each individual before they started on the study, and certainly that made a difference, but it was all over the place. And I'll explain what those all over the place mean in a second. So let's talk about the results. All right. So hopefully that makes sense. 8-week study, 2 times a week, lower body centric, more of a strength hypertrophy day, and then a endurance hypertrophy type of day on the other day. 3 sets on one day for the back squat and leg press for the 12 set group, and then the 18 set group obviously was doing 9 total sets, 4 for the back squat, 5 for the leg press, and then 6 and 6 for the 24 set group. Okay, back squat or 1 RM strength. What happened? The typical thing happened is the 18 set group saw the greatest change. Now they didn't find statistical significance. They got the dreaded like 0.052. So they used terminology which a lot of researchers hate and poo-poo, which is like trending towards significance. I don't think it's that big of a deal because if you're reading studies, you should look at the research anyway. And if you look at the actual percentages of strength change, the 24 set group saw a 5.4% increase in 1 RM strength after 8 weeks. The 18 set group saw a 16.2, and the 12 set group saw 11.3. So remember, what is king when you talk about strength? Load. Okay, load. Well, if you're doing a lot of sets, what happens to load? It declines over time. I mean, it's just naturally it's going to happen. So, we talk a lot about this term junk volume. When it comes to strength, and it's a lot of times used in hypertrophy. When it comes to strength, though, you want to perform quality reps and maintain the load. Load is king. So there still needs to be enough combination, though, of load and volume to, I always use the term practice time, but I'm talking about physiologically practice. Enough exposure. And I know time and retention is usually towards repetitions, but if you think of that same kind of concept here, there's enough time and tension that leads to skeletal muscle strength. Okay, so you have this neurological component, ability to recover, maintain the load, and then put tension on the muscle, again with a similar load. So you don't have this declination in load. If you need to get stronger, you need to lift heavy things. And finding a sweet spot between heavy and volume is important. So in this case, 18 sets was a sweet spot. I mean, keep in mind that the 12 set group saw an increase of 11.3% compared to the 24 set group that saw an increase of 5.4. So again, this is that kind of, okay, 18 is a sweet spot, but if you're going to err on doing less volume when it comes to strength. Okay, keep the load up. All right, when it came to reps to failure, so this was an inverted U that occurred with the strength training, right? 18 was a sweet spot. When it came to reps to failure, that was the other way. It was a U. And so the 24 set group saw an increase of 14.5%. Saw an increase of 33%. So almost another 6 reps. Remember, this is 70% to failure. The 18 set group saw only a 14.5% increase, and the 12 set group saw a 35%. I'm rounding up, it was 34.8% increase. So you have a U now when it comes to endurance, is that the high volume group, 24 set group, and the low volume group saw around 35-ish% increase, where the 18 set group only saw a 14.5% increase. What's up with that? Well, there's a couple things going on here, I think. The one is it reminds me of this kind of argument of list training, low and slow, like a lot of volume, like run 1,000 miles but run slow, versus HIIT training, right? I'm going to do my 1-to-1 ratio or my 1-to-0.3 or 1-to-0.5 ratio on and off, bike sprints or whatever it is. A classic study I think I've talked about on this channel was really awesome because it had elite sprint kayakers, like individuals who had won Olympic medals, if I recall. And they broke these 2 groups up. And one group was the more list type of training. The other group was more the HIIT type training when it came to cardiovascular conditioning. Both groups ended up in the same place in terms of their cardiovascular conditioning. But the group that did the HIIT training, if I remember right, was only like 70% or 75% of the volume. that the high volume, low list type of training did. So both ended up in the same place, okay? But one did a lot less work. And it kind of reminds me of this a little bit, is that 18 sets maybe was a bad combination of both. That you didn't get enough endurance time, but there was the load high enough that you didn't get enough recovery. Where the 24 set group was like ride or die, right? So it's like, we're just going to pummel you, and yes, you're going to adapt or die. 24 sets, your endurance will improve. And it also could have to do a little bit of skeletal muscle hypertrophy too. And I don't mean just the contractile proteins. I'm talking about mitochondria and improving mitochondrial density. Okay, so the strength increases were not that impressive with that 24 set group, but there could have been an increase in the supportive structures. So we would have made a video on sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. Okay, the 12 set group may have been able to keep the load higher and therein recovered a little bit better. Okay, and so instead of, it's kind of like, I get back to like the HIIT training type of thing. This was more of like a HIIT training thing where you went hard, the volume or the load was higher, and the volume was still up, like in terms of the reps per set, but the recovery is better, where 18 was a bad combination of both. That's my hypothesis. I could be completely off here, but that's what I read into this. There's a sweet spot, though. There's ditches in anything for the most part. There are some things that just go linear forever, but for the most part, that there's going to be a ditch, right, on both sides. There's going to be too little. There's the Goldilocks effect, right? In this particular study, I like to see this repeated, though, in this particular study. The strength training Goldilocks effect, I've seen this over and over again. This kind of moderate range is the best, okay? And when we talk about volume, 80 to 85%, or 80 to 89.9% for men especially, is the sweet spot when it comes to load. Now, there's some cool meta-analyses like in football players, right, with men. That's a great range to be, like the old 5x5 training, all that stuff, 5-3-1. I know that circulates into heavier stuff, but still, that in 5x3 usually is a great peaking phase, by the way. It's not something to build strength over a long period of time. This is not volume, okay? But it's in that kind of 80 to 89.9% range. Okay, that's the sweet spot. When it comes to endurance, when it comes to volume and endurance, it looks like you either get smashed and that works, or you can recover a little better and that works. That's good news if you're a endurance athlete. Now, I would argue that if you're trying to build muscle endurance, this fits my bias too, is that if you get stronger, your muscle endurance will improve. Okay. Even this was more of a volume type of study, though. So anyway, I'll leave that. Okay, what about skeletal muscle hypertrophy? Okay, what about skeletal muscle hypertrophy? Well, 24 set, there was no difference across groups, basically. So 24 set group saw a 2.6% increase, 18 set saw a 4.2% increase, and the 12 set group saw a 4.6%. So when it came to statistical significance, the 24 set group was too much, or hypothetically it was too much, and they only saw 2.6%, where the other two groups saw roughly a 4% to 5-ish% increase. Okay, so again, this kind of supports this idea of a sweet spot. And if you look, if you kind of overlay these, like when it at least comes to strength, the 18 set group saw the best, and the 12 set group saw second best in terms of strength, and hypertrophy wise, those were the two best groups as well. So, there is a sweet spot. How's that? At least for this particular group of individuals, 24 sets was unneeded. 18 sets would be perfect for this group when it came to strength and skeletal muscle hypertrophy. All right, let's look at the different, high responder, low, moderate, and high responders. How did that shake out? So it's trying to give you an idea what we're talking about here is when you look at the region of interest in hypertrophy, okay, the third tertile group, so the highest, the high responders saw an increase of 1.6 kilograms, okay, where the low responders saw only 0.3. All right, so that's how they in the middle was 1.1. So this breakdown was based upon skeletal muscle gains in fat-free mass, the region of interest. Okay, and so on the surface, if you're going to hypothesize, you'd say, well, the high responding group probably was the high volume group, right? No, in that the group that had the greatest response, there was 4 from the 12 set group, 4 from the 18 set group, and 4 from the 24 set group. Okay. In the second tertile, there was 4, 4, and 3. 4 from the 12 set, 4 from the... So the bottom line is here that the higher volume group didn't necessarily produce the greatest change in skeletal muscle hypertrophy. The 18 set group didn't produce the greatest change in skeletal muscle hypertrophy. When we talk about the high responders, low responders, when we kind of looked at this in a different way, It didn't matter. The volume was affected people differently. How's that? Now the next question is, if you've watched the video I released about sets, this is an important thing to start to consider. How many sets were the individuals doing before they started the study? In the low responder group, previous sets per week was 15. In the second tertile was 13, and the third tertile was 11. All right. If you read into this a little bit, you could say, okay, the high performing, the high responders, well, 4 of them were 12 set, which is about what they were doing, but the other 8 people were doing, this was quite a jump in volume for them. In fact, if you look at the set differences, it was 1.8 plus or minus 6.7, keep in mind. For the first tertile group, this is a jump in sets, right? The second tertile was 4.3 plus or minus 9.3. That's quite a big range. For the second, and then the third was 6.6 plus or minus 12.4 sets. So, I mean, that's a pretty large standard deviation. Okay, so in other words, if you just go by the mean, the third tertile group, the one that saw that were the high responders, had the greatest increase in sets per week per individual. But keep in mind that standard deviation is pretty massive. Okay, so when growing up in the 80s and the action movie era, Gen Xer, right, is we go to the gym though and we talk about shocking the muscle. You got to shock the muscle. Okay, if you want to be like Arnold, you got to shock the muscle. Maybe there's something to that, right? And I know there's been a lot, and I've started this with clients, is especially clients that have worked a while, is a complete deload. And when it comes to hypertrophy, I know this is common in like powerlifting as a taper, but when it comes to, and that's more of a recovery issue, but when it comes to building skeletal muscle hypertrophy, it may not be a bad idea to shock the muscle in terms of volume. So instead of just taking a deload where you and I always have a hard time with deloads. I understand the necessity of it and pushing blood around, but sometimes to me, and I tend to fall into extremes, meaning it's work hard and then that's just rest, right? These recovery workouts I think are valuable, and I'm not poo-pooing them. It's taken me a while to kind of buy into them, but I think there is some value though in having sharp edges. And I've said this before, the human body likes sharp edges. It likes abrupt changes. It likes shocking the muscle. So maybe in your deload week, take the volume down to 1 set and then come back to your 5 sets the next week. I bet you get sore. So there might be something to that here as well. In the previous study I mentioned, or I talked about, when the point of the study was to see did the previous sets perform make a difference. Okay, and the last thing was the perceptual. So if you're still awake and still with me, good for you. The RPE, so how the individuals rated the session after, remained pretty flat from pre to post, as you expect. And I think, surprising to me, there's not a bigger spread, but there obviously, I'll give you some means here. The 12 set group was 7.37, so the scale on RP is 0 to 10, 10 maximal. 7.3 on the 12 set, 7.5, this is plus or minus 0, 18 set, and then 7.9, almost an 8 on the 24 set group. The feeling score, okay, so more towards feeling bad, the higher the worse, is 2.57 for the 12, 2.83 for the 18, 3.66. So think about the classic Schoenfeld study when there was a 3x10 and 10x3 or something like that. The people who do higher loads for high volumes, that's miserable. Like that's hurts. So not surprising that more volume hurt too. Okay. The point of this study and many others is, if we identify the sweet spot, then we don't need to let's do as little as possible in order to see optimal results. Let's not do the quote unquote junk volume. Okay. And the takeaway from this study, this is my takeaway, and I'm almost at 20 minutes, so hopefully you're still alive, is there's a sweet spot for strength training. At least in this study, it was 18 sets, but keep in mind they had a high-low day that was pretty high in terms of reps per set. That's not a surprise, right? These moderate group, whatever it is defined as typically in these studies, is usually the best when it comes to strength. In this case, 18 sets, Prillipin's table, 18 reps. There's something to 18s. It seems to be pretty good when at 80 to 85% range. That's, optimal recovery, optimal quality work, enough exposure to load. Load is king, right, to get stronger. When it comes to repetitions, in this particular case, it's quote unquote strength endurance, the extremes here may be valuable. And so either ride or die and smash 24 sets, or do really good work and then recover. You know, the kind of hit training versus list training type of argument. That's what I saw. I could be completely wrong there. When it came to skeletal muscle hypertrophy, there was no statistical difference across all these conditions, but it appeared that the 24 sets was too much. As a group, 24 sets was too much, or at least was unneeded, right? Because they saw 2.4. It's an increase in the other groups was like 4 points, I'll say 4.2 to 4.5 or something like that, I think it was. Okay, so 24 sets as a group was too much. However, when you broke it down into the responders and non-responders, or best responders and not as good responders, it appeared the jump in sets per week was the main driver of those that saw the greatest gains in skeletal muscle hypertrophy. So it wasn't necessarily the total volume that made a difference. It was the individual. So this has been 21 minutes of me yapping about this study, and it comes down to this. We're all different. What have you been doing prior? What kind of skeletal muscle, what kind of muscle fiber type do you have? I mean, if you're older, you know yourself. Like, I was a little fat kid running around in junior high running the mile test. And even back then, I'm like, I remember running, probably because I'm traumatized by it, running around thinking, I'm built for power. Like, I remember thinking that as a kid. I'm built for power. I'm not built for this. And I think in my mind, I was probably like the little fat kid crying, like, I'm not built for this, Right? Let me get under a bar, or let me lift something really heavy, or throw something, right? Or hit somebody. Like that. I can do that, right? Well, my fiber type was an extreme, okay? Now, if you look at most elite endurance athletes, they're shifted towards type 1. Well, you know yourself. If you're like, man, I dominated the cross-country circuit, but I can't hardly squat my body weight. Okay, well, you might be extreme type 1 fiber. So the point is that we're all different. And what we've been doing is different. If you're trying to build skeletal muscle hypertrophy, if you've been doing 2 sets and you jump to 6, I wouldn't recommend that, by the way. That's a good way to get a joint injury. But you're probably going to shock the muscle and see some results. But if you've been doing 6 sets and you jump to 7, the effect might be a little less profound. It doesn't mean it won't happen. It just might be profound. You might find you go to 7 and you start to maintenance, or you start to feel like you lose. Maybe you can't recover in time. Maybe your nutrition isn't good enough. Okay, what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of individual processes that go into this. So a coach might be helpful. I'm not trying to sell my coaching service. I'm just saying a coach, okay, might be helpful. Or being cognizant of what you're responding to and non-responding. I tend to respond to any type of weight training. That's easy, but maybe you're not one of those people that have the quote-unquote genetics. And so you're going to have to be more structured in your programming, and maybe taking some of these extremes if you've been training for a while, of making volume jumps. If you're a beginner, don't do a 2 to 6 increase in volume, like I'm talking about sets. But if you're experienced, maybe you go 3 to a 5 or 6 for a cycle, and see what happens. Or take a complete deload, go down to 1 set and come back. If you're a beginner, don't do that. You don't need to, and you get your wrist joint injuries doing that. At least a higher likelihood of doing that. But if you're more experienced, you might be able to get away with that and shock the muscle. Okay, I'm going to start making that popular again. Shock the muscle. Let's make that popular, because there is something to it. It really is, especially when it comes to hypertrophy. Okay, hopefully you found this video helpful. If I said anything weird or contradictory, it's not my fault. I blame society. I'll see you in the next video.